Hello and welcome to Anatomy of an HTML element. In our previous class, we spoke about the opening tag, this, the contents, and the closing tag as the anatomy of an HTML element. But something we did not talk about is what we call the attributes. Attributes define the properties of an element, more like a man that is tall, dark, and handsome. So, if you had just said a man, you would have had something like this: paragraph, the contents, and then the closing paragraph tag. But by saying this paragraph belongs to a class of new interns, what we are saying is when we do a class list of all new interns, this paragraph here would make that list, while this here will not make that list, because we have not specified an attribute called class for this particular paragraph. So we have multiple attributes in HTML that we're going to look at. We have the ID, we have the SRC, and several other attributes. But for now, I want you to know that an input button with a disabled attribute set to true would give you a different behavior from an input button with a disabled attribute set to false. Let me quickly show you that quickly. So let's assume we have this. Let me start from scratch. And I have inputs. I have this. Now you can see it's giving me a box. By default, it believes my type is text. Let me set my type to text implicitly, or explicitly rather, so I can input whatever I want here. Now if I change this type to number, what happens is I can no longer type in text, I can only type in numbers. If I change this type to dates, now I cannot type in text and number, but I can select from a date picker. Also, if I had a Boolean attribute called disabled, so the moment I had disabled, I don't need to add true or false because it is Boolean. It's either there or it's not there. So the moment I had disabled, I am telling the browser that I want this input field disabled. What happens is the user can no longer interact with this input field by reason of just adding this attribute. So attributes are very important in HTML as they change the behavior of an element. Does that make sense? Now we have three major types of attributes. We have element specific attributes, element specific attributes. We have global attributes. Then we have event attributes. Element specific attributes are they refer to attributes that can only be used on a particular element. For example, the anchor tag has what we call an href attribute, and this one links to an external resource, something like www.cnn.com. Now, it is only elements that link to an external resource that use the href attribute. What I mean is, let me show you. So I have the anchor tag, I have an href, and it leads me to www.zigella.com. Go to Zigella. Here is the content. Remember, if I have this, I can click on this and it will redirect me to Zigella. So these are element specific attributes. You can't use it on all HTML elements. Then we have global attributes. Global attributes can be used on all HTML elements. All HTML elements, I say. And then we have event attributes. These event attributes are like every other attribute, except that they call a function. Input. So we said type is text. They call a function that does something in your HTML document. So let's say on click, is an attribute that you can add to this input field, for example. And all you're saying is when this input field is clicked, when a mouse is clicked on it, you should call a function. So let's call the function my function, and then we'll call it with an opening and a close bracket. This way you are saying when this input field is clicked, you should call a function called my function, or you can also call it a name of your choice. And if my function in your script tag, for example, is doing something, let's say it's screaming an alert, is saying I am here, the moment this input is clicked, that function will be triggered and the function will be called. It would scream I am here as an alert or as a console. As you proceed further in HTML, you're going to be using these attributes a lot for a whole lot of your elements, element-specific attributes, global attributes, and event attributes. Let's just consider a few of these attributes together. Before then, let me just show you a thing that is important. An attribute should have a space between it and the element name. So look at this. This is an attribute. This is the element name. I hope you can see this space in between them. You can also see it here. There's a space in between inputs, the last T of input and the first T of type. If there are more than one attribute, the attributes should be separated by spaces. So like we have here, we have type is equal to test. This is already an attribute. You can see the attribute names are in red, the values are in blue. You can see between this value and the next attribute, there's a space. The attribute name should be followed by an equal sign, an attribute value wrapped with opening and closing quote marks. This is the attribute name. This is the value. Attribute name is followed by an equal sign, and the value is wrapped around quotes. So you could have double quotes or single quotes. There is no rule to this, and it's just your choice. Now let's take a look at some global attributes. The most common global attributes that we have is the class, where you can use to group a whole different elements together in one class. That way you can easily refer to them in a style sheet and give them the same style because they belong to the same class. We also have the ID attributes that specifies a unique ID for a particular element. That means two elements cannot have the same ID. That way you can easily target that particular element irrespective of the kind of element it is. You also have the style attributes that you can use to specify inline style or inline CSS style for a particular element. This and many more we are going to consider in the next class as we check out several HTML attributes that are. Yes, we have clipboard events. These events, these are part of event attributes. And for example, you have on copy, on cut, and on paste. These ones are fired when you copy, cut, or paste some content in an element. We have drag events. When elements are dragged, you can easily call a function. You have keyboard events. When you press the key down or when you release the key, you can easily set events on elements. So let's say inside an input element, I press down the key. Before I press it up, I can validate the input to be sure I even want it in the input field or I don't want it. We also have media events for people building, let's say, media apps like radio apps, music players, and the likes. You'll be using these attributes a lot. When you load audio in your audio elements or your video elements, you want to know if it can play through. If it can play through, you want to call a function. If it has ended, if duration changes, you want to call a function. If there is an error in loading the file, you want to call a function. If the data has been loaded, that is the MP3 you are playing for the people using your media app, you want to call a function. These attributes can easily be added to your HTML elements. And lastly, we have the mouse events on click, just like the one we used there. On click, we have on click, we have on double click, we have on mouse down, on mouse move, on mouse out, on mouse over, and several others. In subsequent classes, we are going to be using these attributes to do a whole lot of wonderful things in HTML. Thank you and have a great day.